The Harappan seal is possibly the most distinctive artifact of the Harappan or Indus Valley civilization. Made of a stone called steatite, seals like this one often contain animal motifs and signs from a script that remains undeciphered. Yet we know a great deal about the lives of the people who lived in the region from what they left behind. Their houses, pots, ornaments, tools, and seals. In other words, from archaeological evidence. Let us see what we know about the Harappan civilization and how we know about it. We will explore how archaeological material is interpreted and how interpretations sometimes change. Of course, there are some aspects of the civilization that are as yet unknown and may even remain so. The Indus Valley civilization is also called the Harappan culture. Archaeologists use the term culture for a group of objects distinctive in style that are usually found together within a specific geographical area and period of time. In the case of the Harappan culture, these distinctive objects include seals, beads, weights, stone, blades, and even baked bricks. These objects were found from areas as far apart as Afghanistan, Jammu, Baluchistan, and Gujarat. Named after Harappa, the first site where this unique culture was discovered, the civilization is dated between circa 2600 and 1900 BCE. There were earlier and later cultures, often called Early Harappan and Late Harappan, in the same area. The Harappan civilization is sometimes called the mature Harappan culture to distinguish it from these cultures. There were several archaeological cultures in the region prior to the mature Harappan. These cultures were associated with distinctive pottery, evidence of agriculture and pastoralism. And some craft settlements were generally small and there were virtually no large buildings. It appears that there was a break between the early Harappan and the Harappan civilization, evident from large-scale burning at some sites as well as the abandonment of certain settlements. Mature Harappan culture developed in some of the areas occupied by the early Harappan cultures. These cultures also shared certain common elements including subsistence strategies. The Harappans ate a wide range of plant and animal products including fish. Archaeologists have been able to reconstruct dietary practices from finds of charred grains and seeds. These are studied by archaeobotanists who are specialists in ancient plant remains. Grains found at Harappan sites include wheat, barley, lentil, chickpea, and sesame. Millets are found from sites in Gujarat. Finds of rice are relatively rare. Animal bones found at Harappan sites include those of cattle, sheep, goat, buffalo, and pig. Studies done by archaeozoologists or zoo archaeologists indicate that these animals were domesticated. Bones of wild species such as boar, deer, and gharial are also found. We do not know whether the Harappans hunted these animals themselves or obtained meat from other hunting communities. Bones of fish and fowl are also found. While the prevalence of agriculture is indicated by finds of grain, it is more difficult to reconstruct actual agricultural practices. Were seeds broadcast scattered on plowed lands? Representations on seals in terracotta sculpture indicate that the bull was known, and archaeologists extrapolate from this that oxen were used for plowing. Moreover, terracotta models of the plow have been found at sites in Cholistan and at Banawali, Haryana. Archaeologists have also found evidence of a plowed field at Kalibangan, Rajasthan, associated with early Harappan levels. The field had two sets of furrows at right angles to each other, suggesting that two different crops were grown together. Archaeologists have also tried to identify the tools used for harvesting. Did the Harappans use stone blades set in wooden handles or did they use metal tools? Most Harappan sites are located in semi-arid lands where irrigation was probably required for agriculture. Traces of canals have been found at the Harappan site of Shortugai in Afghanistan, but not in Punjab or Sindh. It is possible that ancient canals silted up long ago. It is also likely that water drawn from wells was used for irrigation. Besides, water reservoirs found in Dholavira, Gujarat may have been used to store water for agriculture. Processing of food required grinding equipment as well as vessels for mixing, blending, and cooking. These were made of stone, metal, and terracotta. This is an excerpt from one of the earliest reports on excavations at Mohenjo-daro, the best known Harappan site. Saddle gourds are found in considerable numbers and they seem to have been the only means in use for grinding cereals. As a rule, they were roughly made of hard, gritty, igneous rock or sandstone and mostly show signs of hard usage. As their bases are usually convex, they must have been set in the earth or in mud to prevent their rocking. Two main types have been found, those on which another smaller stone was pushed or rolled to and fro, and others with which a second stone was used as a pounder, eventually making a large cavity in the nether stone. Querns of the former type were probably used solely for grain, the second type possibly only for pounding herbs and spices for making curries. In fact, stones of this later type are dubbed curry stones by our workmen, and our cook asked for the loan of one from the museum for use in the kitchen. From Ernest Mackay, Further Excavations at Mohenjo-daro, 1937. Perhaps the most unique feature of the Harappan civilization was the development of urban centers. Let us look at one such center, Mohenjo-daro. More closely, although Mohenjo-daro is the most well-known site, the first site to be discovered was Harappa. The settlement is divided into two sections, one smaller but higher and the other much larger but lower. Archaeologists designate these as the citadel and the lower town respectively. The citadel owes its height to the fact that buildings were constructed on mud brick platforms. It was walled, which meant that it was physically separated from the lower town. The lower town was also walled. Several buildings were built on platforms which served as foundations. It has been calculated that if one laborer moved roughly a cubic meter of earth daily just to put the foundations in place, it would have required 4 million person days. In other words, mobilizing labor on a very large scale. Consider something else. Once the platforms were in place, all building activity within the city was restricted to a fixed area on the platforms. So it seems that the settlement was first planned and then implemented accordingly. Other signs of planning include bricks, which, whether sun-dried or baked, were of a standardized ratio where the length and breadth were 4 times and twice the height respectively. Such bricks were used at all Harappan settlements. While most Harappan settlements have a small high western part and a larger lower eastern section, there are variations. At sites such as Dholavira and Lothal, Gujarat, the entire settlement was fortified, and sections within the town were also separated by walls. The citadel within Lothal was not walled off but was built at a height. Although Harappa was the first site to be discovered, it was badly destroyed by brick robbers. As early as 1875, Alexander Cunningham, the first Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India (ASI), often called the father of Indian archaeology, noted that the amount of brick taken from the ancient site was enough to lay bricks for about 100 miles of the railway line between Lahore and Multan. Thus many of the ancient structures at the site were damaged. In contrast, Mohenjo-daro was far better preserved. One of the most distinctive features of Harappan cities was the carefully planned drainage system. If you look at the plan of the lower town, you will notice that roads and streets were laid out along an approximate grid pattern, intersecting at right angles. It seems that streets with drains were laid out first and then houses built along them. If domestic wastewater had to flow into the street drains, every house needed to have at least one wall along a street. The lower town at Mohenjo-daro provides examples of residential buildings. Many were centered on a courtyard with rooms on all sides. The courtyard was probably the center of activities such as cooking and weaving, particularly during hot and dry weather. What is also interesting is an apparent concern for privacy. There are no windows in the walls along the ground level. Besides, the main entrance does not give a direct view of the interior or the courtyard. Every house had its own bathroom paved with bricks, with drains connected through the wall to the street drains. Some houses have remains of staircases to reach a second story or the roof. Many houses had wells, often in a room that could be reached from the outside and perhaps used by passers-by. Scholars have estimated that the total number of wells in Mohenjo-daro was about 700. About the drains, Mackay noted, it is certainly the most complete ancient system as yet discovered. Every house was connected to the street drains. The main channels were made of bricks set in mortar and were covered with loose bricks that could be removed for cleaning. In some cases, limestone was used for the covers. House drains first emptied into a sump or cesspit into which solid matter settled while waste water flowed out into the street drains. Very long drainage channels were provided at intervals with sumps for cleaning. It is a wonder of archaeology that little heaps of material, mostly sand, have frequently been found laying alongside drainage channels, which shows that the debris was not always carted away when the drain was cleared. From Ernst Mackay, Early Indus Civilization, 1948. Drainage systems were not unique to the larger cities, but were found in smaller settlements as well. At Lothal, for example, while houses were built of mud bricks, drains were made of burnt bricks. It is on the citadel that we find evidence of structures that were probably used for special public purposes. These include the warehouse, a massive structure of which the lower brick portions remain, while the upper portions, probably of wood, decayed long ago. And the Great Bath. The Great Bath was a large rectangular tank in a courtyard surrounded by a corridor on all four sides. There were two flights of steps on the north and south leading into the tank, which was made watertight by setting bricks on edge and using a mortar of gypsum. There were rooms on three sides, in one of which was a large well. Water from the tank flowed into a huge drain. Across a lane to the north lay a smaller building with 8 bathrooms, 4 on each side of a corridor, with drains from each bathroom connecting to a drain that ran along the corridor. The uniqueness of the structure, as well as the context in which it was found, the citadel, with several distinctive buildings, has led scholars to suggest that it was meant for some kind of a special ritual bath. Archaeologists generally use certain strategies to find out whether there were social or economic differences amongst people living within a particular culture. These include studying burials. You are probably familiar with the massive pyramids of Egypt, some of which were contemporaneous with the Harappan civilization. Many of these pyramids were royal burials where enormous quantities of wealth was buried. At burials in Harappan sites, the dead were generally laid in pits. Sometimes there were differences in the way the burial pit was made. In some instances, the hollowed out spaces were lined with bricks. Could these variations be an indication of social differences? We are not sure. Some graves contain pottery and ornaments, perhaps indicating a belief that these could be used in the afterlife. Jewelry has been found in burials of both men and women. In fact, in the excavations at the cemetery in Harappa in the mid-1980s, an ornament consisting of 3 shell rings, jasper, a kind of semi-precious stone, bead and hundreds of micro beads was found near the skull of a male. In some instances, the dead were buried with copper mirrors, but on the whole, it appears that the Harappans did not believe in burying precious things with the dead. Another strategy to identify social differences is to study artifacts, which archaeologists broadly classify as utilitarian and luxuries. The first category includes objects of daily use made fairly easily out of ordinary materials such as stone or clay. These include querns, pottery, needles, flesh rubbers, body scrubbers, etc., and are usually found distributed throughout settlements. Archaeologists assume objects were luxuries if they are rare or made from costly non-local materials or with complicated technologies. These little pots of fancy, a material made of ground sand or silica mixed with color and a gum and then fired, were probably considered precious because they were difficult to make. The situation becomes more complicated when we find what seem to be articles of daily use such as spindle whorls made of rare materials such as fences. Do we classify these as utilitarian or luxuries? If we study the distribution of such artifacts, we find that rare objects made of valuable materials are generally concentrated in large settlements like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa and are rarely found in the smaller settlements. For example, miniature pots of fancy, perhaps used as perfume bottles, are found mostly in Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, and there are none from small settlements like Kalibangan. Gold too was rare, and as at present, probably precious all the gold jewelry found at Harappan sites was recovered from hoards. Chanhudaro is a tiny settlement, less than 7 hectares as compared to Mohenjo-daro 125 hectares, almost exclusively devoted to craft production, including bead making, shell cutting, metalworking, seal making, and weight making. The variety of materials used to make beads is remarkable. Stones like carnelian of a beautiful red color, jasper, crystal, quartz, and steatite, metals like copper, bronze, and gold, and shell, fancy, and terracotta or burnt clay. Some beads were made of 2 or more stones cemented together, some of stone with gold caps. The shapes were numerous: disc shaped, cylindrical, spherical, barrel shaped, segmented. Some were decorated by incising or painting, and some had designs etched onto them. Techniques for making beads differed according to the material. Steatite, a very soft stone, was easily worked. Some beads were molded out of a paste made with steatite powder. This permitted making a variety of shapes, unlike the geometrical forms made out of harder stones. How the steatite micro bead was made remains a puzzle for archaeologists studying ancient technology. Archaeologists' experiments have revealed that the red color of carnelian was obtained by firing the yellowish raw material and beads at various stages of production. Nodules were chipped into rough shapes and then finally flaked into the final form. Grinding, polishing, and drilling completed the process. Specialized drills have been found at Chanudaro, Lothal, and more recently at Dholavera. If you locate Nageshwar and Balakot on map, you will notice that both settlements are near the coast. These were specialized centers for making shell objects, including bangles, ladles, and inlay, which were taken to other settlements. Similarly, it is likely that finished products such as beads from Chanudaro and Lothal were taken to the large urban centers such as Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. In order to identify centers of craft production, archaeologists usually look for the following: raw materials such as stone nodules, whole shells, copper ore, tools, unfinished objects, rejects, and waste material. In fact, waste is one of the best indicators of craft work. For instance, if shell or stone is cut to make objects, then pieces of these materials will be discarded as waste at the place of production. Sometimes larger waste pieces were used up to make smaller objects, but minuscule bits were usually left in the work area. These traces suggest that apart from small specialized centers, craft production was also undertaken in large cities such as Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. As is obvious, a variety of materials was used for craft production, while some such as clay were locally available. Many such as stone, timber and metal had to be procured from outside the alluvial plain. Terracotta toy models of bullock carts suggest that this was one important means of transporting goods and people across land routes. Riverine routes along the Indus and its tributaries as well as coastal routes were also probably used.